The sun shone brightly over the peaceful Meadowview Park, a serene retreat where families gathered to enjoy the weekend. The playground echoed with children's laughter, while parents lounged on picnic blankets or watched their kids from the sidelines. Amid the vibrant activity, John Reynolds, a retired veteran in his early 60s, sat quietly on a wooden bench near the edge of the park. His loyal German shepherd, Max, lay obediently at his feet, ears twitching occasionally at the nearby commotion. John had spent decades in the military, traveling to places most people only saw on the news. Now retired, he relished these quiet moments, finding solace in the simple joys of civilian life. The cheerful park, with its colorful swings and tree-lined paths, was a welcome contrast to the chaos and conflict he had known. However, even in his moments of calm, his military instincts remained sharp. John was the type of man who never truly let his guard down. Max let out a low growl, his ears perking up. John glanced down at his dog, whose gaze was fixed on a group of motorcycles parked near the park's outer fence. Following Max's cue, John shifted his attention to the riders who had gathered there. A group of 5 men loitered near their bikes, their black leather jackets adorned with patches, their voices carrying an edge of arrogance. Their loud laughter and casual disregard for the families nearby stood out sharply against the otherwise tranquil scene. At first, John dismissed them as nothing more than bikers taking a break from the road, but as he observed their movements, something about their behavior unsettled him. They weren't just relaxing, they were watching. Their eyes scanned the playground, lingering on specific children. One of them, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his neck, leaned against his bike and pointed toward a young girl playing on the swings. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her red dress fluttering in the breeze as she giggled and called out to her mother. John's stomach tightened. He had spent enough time reading body language during his military career to know when something wasn't right. These men weren't here by chance, and their interest in the children wasn't innocent. He adjusted his posture, sitting up straighter on the bench, and gave Max a reassuring pat. The girl's mother was seated on a bench nearby, chatting animatedly with another parent. She glanced over at her daughter occasionally, but seemed unaware of the group of bikers watching her child. One of the men, a stocky figure with a scruffy beard, nudged the wiry man and muttered something. They both chuckled, their laughter cutting through the park's cheerful ambiance like a jagged blade. John's mind raced. He couldn't be sure what they were planning, but his instinct screamed at him to stay alert. The thought of anyone targeting a child filled him with a quiet rage. He had seen too much evil in the world to ignore potential danger, especially when it came to someone so vulnerable. His gaze locked on the bikers, studying their every move. A few minutes later, the wiry man casually strolled toward the playground, his swagger too deliberate to be innocent. John tensed as he watched the man approach the little girl on the swing. The biker crouched down, grinning as he pulled a piece of candy from his pocket and offered it to her. "Hey there, kiddo," the man said, his tone oily. "Want some candy? Got plenty more where this came from." The girl hesitated, glancing toward her mother. "No, thank you," she said politely, her small voice carrying a hint of unease. "Ah, don't be shy," the man coaxed, his grin widening. "I've got a toy for you, too." He pulled out a small stuffed animal from his jacket, holding it out as though it were a prize. The girl glanced at the toy, her innocence battling with her instincts. John stood up, his movements deliberate but calm. He walked toward the playground, Max trotting at his side. His presence was unassuming, but his eyes were sharp and focused. As he approached, he called out to the girl. "Hey there, sweetheart," John said, his voice steady and kind. "Your mom's calling for you." The girl looked up at John, relief washing over her face. She quickly jumped off the swing and ran toward her mother, who was still deep in conversation and oblivious to what had just transpired. The biker straightened, his grin replaced by a scowl. "Mind your business, old man," he sneered, glaring at John. John met the man's gaze without flinching. "When it comes to kids, it is my business," he said evenly. His tone was calm, but there was steel behind his words. "You've got no reason to be hanging around here." The wiry man chuckled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He turned and walked back to his group, muttering something under his breath. The other bikers watched John closely now, their postures tense. John stood his ground, his hand resting lightly on Max's leash, ready for whatever might happen next. As the bikers regrouped near their motorcycles, their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and the others seemed to defer to him without question. He sized John up, his dark eyes scanning the veteran with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "You've got a big mouth for someone minding their own business," the leader said, his voice low and menacing. "Maybe you should think twice before sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." John didn't respond immediately. He knew men like this. They thrived on intimidation and expected others to back down. But John wasn't the type to back down. He met the leader's gaze, his expression calm but unyielding. "This is a park for families," John said. "If you're here to cause trouble, you've picked the wrong place." The leader smirked, his hand resting casually on the handle of a knife tucked into his belt. "And what are you gonna do about it, old man?" he taunted. "Call the cops. They'll be too late to help." John's eyes flicked to the knife, then back to the leader's face. He didn't need weapons to handle situations like this. He had decades of training and a deep well of patience. Still, he knew he had to tread carefully. The bikers outnumbered him, and there were too many innocent people nearby to risk escalating the situation. Max let out a low growl, sensing the tension. The sound seemed to unnerve the bikers, who exchanged uneasy glances. The leader's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. "Keep your dog in check," he said, his voice sharp. "Wouldn't want him getting hurt." John's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Max is fine where he is. You, on the other hand, should probably move along." For a moment, it seemed as though the leader might back down, but then the wiry man from earlier spoke up, his voice dripping with defiance. "We don't take orders from some washed-up soldier," he said, stepping closer to John. "You think you're tough just because you served? That don't mean squat to us." The insult hung in the air, a challenge waiting to be answered. John felt the weight of the moment pressing on him, the familiar rush of adrenaline sharpening his senses. He wasn't looking for a fight, but if these men pushed him, he wouldn't hesitate to defend himself, or the innocent people around him. As the bikers linger, their intentions become clearer. They're not leaving without causing trouble, and John realizes the situation is escalating. He notices one of the bikers gesturing toward the little girl again, this time whispering to another member of the gang. John's heart pounds as he sees the two men begin to circle back toward the playground, their movements slow and deliberate. Max stands at attention, his growl growing louder. John tightens his grip on the leash, his mind racing with options. He knows he can't let the bikers take another step toward the child, but he also knows he has to act carefully to avoid putting anyone else in harm's way. The leader suddenly barks an order, and the two bikers near the playground make their move. One lunges toward the little girl, his hand reaching out to grab her arm. Her scream pierces the air, drawing the attention of everyone in the park. John doesn't hesitate. In an instant, he releases Max's leash and charges forward, his military training kicking in. The fight is on, and John knows he'll do whatever it takes to protect the child. John Reynolds moves swiftly, his body responding instinctively. As the biker reached for the little girl, John intercepted him, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it just enough to force him to release her arm. The girl stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear, but her legs moved, carrying her to her mother, who had turned around just in time to see the chaos. The wiry biker yelped in pain, struggling to pull away. John released him with a shove, his firm voice cutting through the commotion. "Leave, now." The leader, still standing near the motorcycles, watched with a mix of annoyance and intrigue. "Well, would you look at that?" he drawled, a crooked grin spreading across his face. "The old man's got some fight in him." The other bikers closed ranks, forming a semicircle around John. Max stood by his side, his teeth bared and his growl rumbling low. The park, once filled with laughter and chatter, had fallen silent. Parents hurried to gather their children, retreating to the far side of the park. A few bystanders pulled out their phones, recording the escalating confrontation. "You've made your point," John said, his voice calm but firm. "You're not taking anyone from this park. Walk away before this gets worse." The leader tilted his head, considering the words. Then he stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. "See, old man, we don't take kindly to being told what to do. You think you're some kind of hero?" He gestured toward his group. "There's 5 of us and 1 of you. Maybe it's time you learned when to back down." John didn't flinch. "You think numbers scare me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The leader smirked, signaling to one of his men, a burly figure with a shaved head. The man lunged at John, fists raised, clearly expecting the veteran to be an easy target. But John had spent decades honing his reflexes, and he sidestepped the attack with precision, using the momentum to deliver a sharp elbow to the biker's side. The man staggered, gasping for air, as John stepped back into position. The other bikers hesitated, their confidence shaken. "What the hell was that?" one of them muttered. The leader's smile faded. "Don't just stand there, get him." The remaining bikers moved in unison, but John was ready. Years of military discipline had taught him how to handle multiple opponents, and he used their aggression against them. A second biker swung a punch, which John blocked with his forearm before sweeping the man's legs out from under him. Another tried to grab John from behind, but Max lunged, barking fiercely and forcing the man to retreat. The scene had drawn a small crowd of onlookers. Some watched in awe, while others shouted warnings. A few called the police, their voices trembling as they described the chaotic scene unfolding at the park. One mother whispered to her husband, "Who is that man? He's incredible." The husband, clutching their son tightly, replied, "He must be ex-military. Look at how he moves." John's focus remained on the bikers, his breathing steady as he calculated his next moves. He wasn't just fighting to protect himself, he was fighting for the safety of everyone in the park. The thought of these men harming a child, or anyone, drove him forward with unwavering resolve. The leader, frustrated by his men's failures, pulled out a switchblade, the blade gleaming in the sunlight. "You've had your fun, old man," he growled, "but it ends now." John's eyes narrowed. He shifted his stance, his muscles tensing as he prepared for the attack. The leader lunged, slashing wildly, but John moved with the precision of someone who had faced far greater threats. He dodged the blade, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground. The leader let out a pained grunt, but he wasn't finished. With his free hand, he swung a punch, aiming for John's jaw. John ducked, countering with a well-placed strike to the man's ribs. The leader stumbled back, clutching his side, as John stepped forward, his voice like steel. "This is your last chance. Walk away." Just as it seemed the bikers might back down, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their bravado faltering. One of them muttered, "Cops are coming, we gotta go." The leader glared at John, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he spat before motioning to his men. "Let's ride." The bikers scrambled to their motorcycles, revving their engines and speeding away as the police cars pulled into the parking lot. A group of officers exited their vehicles, their hands on their holstered weapons. John raised his hand, stepping away from the fallen knife to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm the one who called," he said calmly, nodding toward the park. "They tried to kidnap a child." The officers quickly assessed the situation, questioning the bystanders and comforting the shaken mother and child. One officer approached John, a look of respect on his face. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Most people wouldn't have stepped in like that." John shrugged. "Most people haven't seen what I've seen. I couldn't just stand by." As the police took statements, the park slowly returned to normal. Parents who had fled began to return, their children clinging to them tightly. The mother of the little girl approached John, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved my daughter. I don't know how to repay you." John offered a small smile, his tone humble. "No need for thanks, ma'am. Just glad she's safe." The little girl, clutching a stuffed animal, looked up at John with wide eyes. "You're like a superhero," she said softly. John chuckled, patting Max on the head. "Max is the real hero. He kept us safe." Though the immediate threat had passed, John couldn't shake the feeling that the bikers weren't finished. His instincts were proven right later that evening when he noticed a pair of motorcycles idling near his house. He stepped outside, his silhouette framed by the glow of the porch light, as the bikers sped off into the night. The message was clear. They wanted revenge. John knew he couldn't ignore the threat. He spent the next few days preparing, securing his home, and ensuring Max was always by his side. He informed the local authorities, but without solid evidence of a direct threat, there was little they could do. Meanwhile, the community rallied around John. The story of his bravery had spread, and neighbors offered their support. Parents from the park brought meals, while others kept a watchful eye on the neighborhood. Despite the danger, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting his community. The confrontation came sooner than John expected. Late one night, the roar of motorcycles echoed through the quiet streets. John stepped onto his porch, Max at his side, as the bikers rolled up, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The leader dismounted, his scarred face illuminated by the moonlight. "We told you this wasn't over," he said, his voice dripping with malice. John crossed his arms, his stance unwavering. "You came to the wrong house." The bikers attempted to intimidate John, but he stood his ground. When one of them moved toward the porch, Max barked fiercely, causing the man to stumble back. John took a step forward, his voice firm. "This is your only warning. Leave now or face the consequences." The leader laughed, but it was clear he wasn't as confident as before. "You think you can take us all?" John's eyes narrowed. "I know." The tension snapped like a taut wire, and the bikers rushed forward. John fought with the precision of a trained soldier, using his environment to his advantage. Max defended his flank, biting and growling to keep the attackers at bay. Just as it seemed John might be overwhelmed, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. The bikers hesitated, their confidence wavering. John seized the opportunity, delivering a final blow that sent the leader sprawling. As the police cars drew closer, the bikers scrambled to their motorcycles, leaving their fallen leader behind. John stood tall on his porch, Max by his side, as the flashing lights illuminated the scene. The leader glared at John, blood trickling from his lip. "This isn't over," he growled. John's expression was calm, but his words were firm. "Yes, it is." This continuation sets up for a high-stakes conclusion, with John's courage and military training on full display. The escalating tension with the biker gang, the community's support, and the moral undertones of protecting the innocent make the story compelling and emotionally resonant. The police cars screeched to a halt, their red and blue lights casting an eerie glow over the street. Officers poured out, their weapons drawn and voices commanding. The biker gang hesitated, their confidence shattered by John's unwavering resistance and the looming presence of law enforcement. Some attempted to flee, their motorcycles roaring into the night, but others stayed frozen, caught between their instinct for survival and their loyalty to their leader. The gang's leader, bruised and humiliated, sat on the ground near John's porch, his scarred face contorted in a mix of pain and rage. Blood trickled from his split lip, staining the collar of his leather jacket. Despite his battered appearance, his eyes burned with defiance. John remained on his porch, Max at his side, both standing like sentinels. The veteran's posture was steady, his gaze fixed on the leader. John's presence alone seemed to speak volumes. He had faced far worse enemies in his time, and he would not be intimidated by a gang of bullies. "Hands in the air!" barked the lead officer, his voice cutting through the tension. The remaining bikers, recognizing their dwindling options, complied reluctantly, raising their hands and stepping away from their bikes. Two officers approached the leader, pulling him to his feet and handcuffing him with practiced efficiency. "Your little reign of terror ends here," one officer muttered as he pushed the leader toward a waiting squad car. The officer in charge approached John, his expression a mix of respect and concern. "Mr. Reynolds, are you all right?" John nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged. "I'm fine. They came looking for trouble, and they found it." The officer gestured toward the gang. "We've been tracking this group for months. They've been linked to extortion, robbery, and now an attempted kidnapping at the park. Thanks to your actions, we've got enough to press serious charges." John glanced at the leader, who sat sulking in the back of a police car, his defiance replaced by frustration. "Let's hope it sticks this time," John said, his voice tinged with skepticism. "It will," the officer assured him, "and we'll have someone patrol your neighborhood for the next few days, just in case." As the police loaded the remaining gang members into their vehicles and began to clear the scene, John finally allowed himself to relax. He crouched down to Max's level, ruffling the dog's fur. "Good boy, Max," he murmured. "You did great." Max wagged his tail, his fierce growl replaced by a contented pant. The sight of his loyal companion brought a rare smile to John's face, a moment of warmth amid the chaos. John's neighbors began to emerge from their homes, their cautious curiosity giving way to admiration. A few approached him hesitantly, offering words of thanks and praise. One elderly woman placed a hand on his arm, her voice trembling as she said, "You're a hero, Mr. Reynolds. We're lucky to have someone like you in the neighborhood." John shook his head, his humility evident. "I just did what needed to be done, nothing heroic about it." Over the next few days, the story of John's confrontation with the biker gang spread throughout the community and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story, labeling him the Veteran Guardian, a title that made John chuckle despite himself. The attention was overwhelming at times, but John appreciated the outpouring of support from his neighbors. Parents from the park formed a small group to coordinate efforts to thank John. They organized a barbecue in his honor, held at the very park where the kidnapping attempt had occurred. Families brought food, shared stories, and expressed their gratitude to John for stepping in when it mattered most. During the event, the mother of the little girl approached John once again, her daughter in tow. "We owe you so much," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't been there." The little girl held out a hand-drawn picture, her small fingers clutching the paper tightly. It showed John and Max standing like superheroes, with the words, "Thank you, Mr. John," scrawled in colorful letters at the top. John took the picture with a soft smile. "This is the best gift I've ever received," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Thank you, sweetheart." A week after the confrontation, John received an unexpected knock on his door. When he opened it, he found the lead officer from the night of the arrest standing there, a file folder in hand. "Officer Daniels," John greeted him. "What brings you by?" Daniels stepped inside, his expression serious. "I wanted to give you an update on the case. The gang leader's been talking, trying to cut a deal. Turns out the gang wasn't just targeting random kids. They were involved in a trafficking operation." John's jaw tightened, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Trafficking," he repeated, his voice low. "How deep does it go?" Daniels sighed. "Deeper than we'd like, but thanks to your intervention, we've got a lead on their contacts. You may have saved more lives than you realize." The news hit John hard. He had thought he was protecting one child, but now he understood the broader implications of his actions. It wasn't just about one moment in the park. It was about dismantling something far more sinister. That night, as John sat on his porch with Max at his feet, he reflected on everything that had transpired. He had joined the military decades ago with the belief that his purpose was to protect others, to stand up against threats no matter the cost. Retirement had dulled that sense of purpose, but the events of the past weeks had reignited it. The world was still full of dangers, but John knew he wasn't done fighting. His skills, his discipline, his unwavering sense of right and wrong, they were all tools he could still use to make a difference. The following month, John began working with local law enforcement and community groups to improve safety in the neighborhood. He started training sessions at the park, teaching parents and children basic self-defense techniques and how to stay vigilant. His calm demeanor and wealth of experience made him a trusted figure, and attendance at the sessions grew with each passing week. The park, once a place tinged with fear, became a hub of activity again. Families returned, their confidence restored by John's presence and the collective efforts of the community. The memory of the biker gang's actions remained, but it served as a reminder of the importance of standing together against threats. Months later, while walking Max through the park, John spotted a familiar figure. The little girl from the park ran up to him, holding out a small trophy. Her mother followed close behind, smiling warmly. "This is for you," the girl said, handing him the trophy. It was a simple plastic award with the words, "Our Hero," engraved on a gold plate. John accepted it with a rare, genuine smile. "Thank you," he said softly, "but you don't need to give me anything. Seeing you safe and happy is enough." The mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll always be a hero to us, Mr. Reynolds. Thank you for everything." As John watched the girl run back to the playground, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had done his part, not just for her, but for the countless lives that would be impacted by his actions. Max nudged his leg, and John chuckled, giving his loyal companion a pat. "Let's keep an eye out, boy," he said. "There's always someone who might need a little help." With that, John resumed his quiet vigil, a symbol of strength and protection in a world that always seemed to need it. The park buzzed with life, but no one would ever forget the day a veteran stood his ground and reminded everyone what true courage looked like.